To start with, I'm going to introduce Lana Ireland. She's already lined up over here, the sport psychologist.
Thank you so much for coming. I really enjoy working with parents of youth athletes. I think that they are a vastly underrated stakeholder. So unless your child really goes on to get some massive contract or play professionally, for the most athletes, their parents over the lifetime of that athlete are going to be the main investor in that child. So, and really from a psychological perspective, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today, you are pretty much the most influential person in their development up to a certain point. And then there's another point where, you know, they're more influenced by their peers, coaches, teachers, etc. But still, who they've become, really, you know, the nature-nurture thing, so much of it is up to parenting. So Psychology 101 really is the relationship between thoughts, feelings and behaviours. So from a brain perspective, breaking it down to absolute basics, if you were to use your hand as a brain model, your thumb, if you tucked it underneath inside a fist, is your limbic system, so that's your emotional centre. This is like a really basic model, by the way. It's not this simple, but we'll just work off this. So the thumb tucked right in nice and tight, that's your emotional centre, that's your feelings. So I've got we have to have emoji for everything these days, right? Yeah. So we've got the feelings emoji there, that's basically tucked in nice and tight in the centre of your brain. A feeling is always something in your body. So there's thousands of feelings words. I could pull out a list of all the different feelings. But you always feel a sensation in your body some way, so that's also important to keep in mind. Thoughts are anything that you have either a picture or words go through your head, so that's a thought. So your thoughts are really the cap, your thinking cap on top that tucks over the top of the limbic system, so that's your cerebral cortex. And then your behaviours, so the muscles there, that's the base of your brain. Your motor cortex, that controls all of your autonomous systems, so breathing, digestion, everything else, but then also your movement, so to be able to move your arms and legs. So that's when Psychology 101 is the relationship between thoughts, feelings and behaviours. All those things are bidirectional relationships. So I'll get to an example in a second. This little lady down the bottom here, when we talk about mindfulness, so we have thoughts, feelings and behaviours, but you also have a mind. So your mind is the part that can observe your thoughts, feelings and behaviours without judgment. It's literally your mind can watch the whole lot. So that's where things get a bit tricky. But when we talk about mindfulness, which is a really important skill for performance, that's what we're referring to. So as an example, we'll do a little bit of an activity just by yourselves, it's okay, in your own head. We'll start with thought. So if you can either eyes open or eyes closed, you can just look at focus at a spot on the wall, etc. But I want you to picture in your head a chocolate cake or a piece of chocolate cake, the most delicious, appealing looking piece of chocolate cake. If you don't like chocolate cake, find something else, ice cream, whatever it is your thing. But the most delicious thing that you can think of, I want you to picture it. So you have a visual. So that's a thought, you're thinking about the chocolate cake. You might have feelings coming up, so a sensation of hunger or pleasure or whatever it might be associated with that thought, but the picture in your head of the chocolate cake, that's the thought. Okay, now stop thinking about the chocolate cake. I'll go back to that in a second. We'll move on to feelings. So now I'd really like you to pick a spot in the room on the wall. So find any spot, any piece of wall is a good piece of wall. And I want you to fall in love with that piece of wall. I want you to develop feelings for that piece of wall. That is the most amazing piece of wall you've ever seen in your life. You love that wall so much. You want to take it home. You want to tell your family about that piece of wall. You have strong feelings for that piece of wall. You really, really love that wall. You just can't help yourself. Strong feelings. I want you to fall in love with the wall. How are we going to fall in love with the wall? Is anyone in love with the wall? You're not going to admit it even if you are. Okay, so, and how are we going with the chocolate cake? Not thinking about the chocolate cake? The visual hasn't come back? No? Okay, good. So the demonstration, in very, very brief, very simple demonstration of that is that it's very difficult to control our feelings. So by choice, it's really hard to either evoke a feeling or switch a feeling off. So that's, probably a bit of a basic. Thoughts, we have some capacity to influence or control, but feelings, definitely very hard to control our feelings. Behaviours, and that's how we move our arms and legs, are mostly within our control. So the only exception with behavioural stuff is reactivity. So when we're not mindful, the opposite of mindfulness is being reactive. There are pathways in our brain that will get us to behave before we've had a chance to think about anything. So if you're walking along a path, there's a snake, you're going to move before you have a chance to realise it's just a stick. But there's some pathways in the brain that are from that limbic system, that thumb tucked in, directly on the motor cortex. It's a direct pathway. So the thinking doesn't get involved before the action happens. But for the most part, behaviour is controllable. Okay, so a little bit of developmental psych here, around age and stage and development. I'll keep it as basic as I can. So physical development, keep in mind that cognitive development and emotional development usually goes hand in hand with physical development. So if you're a late developer, then those other things tend to develop late as well. The social emotional changes that come with preteen and adolescence, girls become quite competitive, complicated and changeable. They're also very social. So between that kind of 10 to 14, a lot of sports do see the influence of girls making decisions in their sport or to leave their sport based on social factors. In team sports, they'll choose a club because their friends are there. Absolutely nothing to do with performance, coach, distance from home, price, any other factor. What matters to a girl at that age group does tend to be more socially focused. And that does actually sustain, well into professional careers even around social factors for female athletes. Boys, less focused on that, more focused on what, not with whom. They just want to play. A lot of that testosterone stuff kind of kicks in, competitiveness, really, enjoyable competitiveness for the male athletes as they hit that kind of phase. And certainly, by the time your children are 14, 15, about 80% of their influence is coming from their peers. And not from coaches, not from school teachers, not from you, from their peers. So that makes life interesting as well. I'll quickly cover the performance cycle. So from a mental perspective, if I'm working with athletes, we go through this process, and I kind of call it good mental hygiene. So you're performing, and then you're evaluating, you are then recovering, you're preparing, and then you perform again. That can be a microcycle. So if you're working on your serve in training, for example, you execute once, so that's your performance. You evaluate, hopefully you're using some good cognitive skills in your evaluation. You recover, you prepare, and then you do it again. So that's one tiny little microcycle in training. This can then be over a tournament. This can be match to match. So one match is a performance, and then there's an evaluation, recovery, prepare, and go again. And it can be a season, so you play a whole season. Can be the performance, and then you evaluate, you recover, have time off, prepare, and then go again. So if I'm working with a foundational level athlete, so early teens kind of level, starting to play state level, I might do 3 sessions, one on each, around the skills, mental skills involved in each of those phases of performance around the performance cycle. The parent's role in the performance cycle. So again, depending on where you're at in that accountability and responsibility stage, so if you're kind of 10 and under, then the parent's role in this performance cycle is quite important, because you are the one that the parents, the athletes turn around and looking to say, oh, how'd I do? I know my own children clipped me once and said, oh, you look so grumpy when you're at swimming training, because the swimming training way, and they look around and they're like, you're always frowning. I'm like, well, I'm not even watching you. I'm sitting there working and doing bills and there. Of course I look grumpy. But you are the one that they're turning to go, oh, hey, how am I going? So it is important, if you are playing that role as a parent, that you're aware of your own emotions, your own cognitions, and your own behaviours, because you are really that primary driver. And so if you're the biggest influence from a behavioural perspective, you've got to make sure that you're on top of your own processes cognitively as well. Again, I'll skip through this pretty quickly. If it was a longer session, I'll go into this in more detail. But I think I've done workshops for Tennis Australia in the past where you do some strategic planning from a parenting perspective around what's coming next, you know, for your athlete. Where are they at, and where might they be headed, and how do you prepare for that? And as a parent and as a family, what have you got in place for what comes next? We don't have time for that today, but I do think it's worth defining what is success. And from my perspective, there's only two really key points, and that is well-being. So when we talk about well-being, everyone wants to discuss mental health at the moment, and which is great. I think it's really fantastic that conversation is happening. We're still starting to move beyond mental health, the mental health conversation being about mental illness only, and starting to look at flourishing and mental health being really flourishing with the cognitive, emotional, physical and social, you know, that concept is starting to get a bit more traction, which I think is fantastic. But from a parenting perspective, and for parenting your athlete as they're coming through the pathway, you know, that's got to be front and centre, and it always is for parents. And you wouldn't be sitting in this room, you wouldn't take time to come and be at a conversation like this, and it's great that it's put on by Tennis Queensland, if you weren't wholly invested in your child's wellbeing. So very important. And from a performance perspective, really, you know, success is them reaching their potential. I think that's what you always want as a parent, but balancing both of them. But I don't think one can happen, I don't think the performance can happen, and they can't reach their potential without well-being anyway. So, you know, they are actually complementary. Everyone talks about balancing them, but they are complementary. So that's pretty much the basics I wanted to cover quickly, but I'm really open to questions and happy to have a chat.